when the sports star Alfredo Di Stéfano, the greatest scorer that Real Madrid Football Club had for a long time, he visited in 1963 the prosperous and paradisiacal Caribbean nation called Venezuela in order to play the Club World Cup. He never imagined that he was about to experience, in his own words, the most tense and curious hours of his entire life. On Saturday, August 24th, Venezuela, and the world woke up to the news that the Blonde Arrow, one of the stars in the history of soccer, had been kidnapped by an armed wing of the Venezuelan Communist Party. The so-called National Liberation Armed Forces, in a unit led by the revolutionary Paul Del Rio, and for the next several hours and days, no one knew where he was. In a time of complex political clashes, not only in Venezuela but all over the world, the news caused a great national and global shock. Join us to learn about this extraordinary event in the history of soccer and in the history of armed struggle. This is Reynaldo José Carrillo Vilches speaking. This is La Nueva Enciclopedia. I invite you to give us great support by liking this video and leaving your comments, which we always read, by turning on bell notifications, subscribing to the channel, of course, and sharing this material with all your contacts on WhatsApp, on social media, and anywhere else. So without further ado, let's start with today's story. Let's first talk about the man who will become a global star in soccer history, Alfredo Di Stéfano. Born on July 4, 1926 in Buenos Aires, near the La Boca neighborhood, Alfredo Di Stéfano showed an inclination for sports from a young age, excelling in athletics and other sports besides football. His football career began in the youth divisions of the famous Argentine team, River Plate, making his first division debut in 1944. At River Plate, he established himself as an outstanding goal scorer, winning national championships and becoming an iconic figure with the nickname the Blonde Arrow. Arrow refers to his speed, and blonde refers to his light-colored hair. In 1949, during a long strike in Argentine football, he decided to emigrate to Colombia to join Millonarios of Bogotá, where he continued to shine and now gained international popularity. By 1953, at the age of 27, he achieved the dream of any of his peers and was signed as a forward by Real Madrid Football Club in Spain. In the midst of a controversial player dispute with FC Barcelona, teams that stirred up fans both nationally and internationally. That the arrival of Di Stéfano at Real Madrid is a turning point for this club, which had gone more than 20 years without winning a league. But with his stellar performance, the team became dominant in Spain and Europe, winning 8 leagues in 11 years and 5 consecutive European Cups between 1955 and 1960. At Real Madrid, Di Stéfano is the top goal scorer in 5 Spanish leagues, and he inevitably becomes a living legend of the Spanish capital, where children, adults, and the elderly, not only from Madrid, not only from Spain, but from all over the world, become fans and admirers of Alfredo Di Stéfano. By mid-1963, at 37 years old, although he is going through his last days as a Real Madrid player, he is still a living legend of football. Alfredo Di Stéfano travels to Venezuela with the rest of his team to participate in the so-called Club World Cup, whose host that year would be the city of Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, and one of the most prosperous, safest, most modern, and best equipped Hispanic American cities of its time. For this kind of event, that cup was scheduled for the 10th, 18th, and 30th of August that year. Curiously, months before leaving Madrid for Venezuela, Di Stéfano had participated in the filming of the movie titled Sunday Battle, in which Di Stéfano, playing himself, is kidnapped by a gang of criminals who who were seeking a large ransom for the footballer's release. A rather striking fact, especially considering what would later happen to Di Stéfano in Venezuela. Going back to the events, several of the main Real Madrid players and their technical staff had arrived in Caracas. The first match takes place on August 18th at the Olympic Stadium of the Central University of Venezuela, the same place where the other scheduled matches of this cup will take place. In general, the matches are filled with excitement and adrenaline, and in addition, they are close games that delight the Venezuelan capital and offer a fascinating glimpse of the football of those years. However, what seemed to be a unique spectacle in Caracas would soon become one of the most tense moments worldwide, not only at the Club World Cup, but in every country where there were football fans. And this is where we need to pause, not in the life of Alfredo Di Stéfano, but in the lives of those who made the moment possible. By 1963, the Venezuelan nation was at the beginning of an open war between the national government, led at that time by President Rómulo Betancourt, and several guerrilla, revolutionary, and communist organizations that not long ago had declared the beginning of armed struggle to seize power. One of these guerrilla organizations was the so-called Armed Forces of National Liberation, or the FALN, the Communist Party of Venezuela, founded in 1931 and with a long history, had been marginalized from Venezuelan politics. After the famous Punto Fijo Pact, a governance agreement signed in October 1958, shortly after the overthrow of President Marcos Pérez Jiménez by the parties Acción Democrática, COPE, and URD. With the intensification of social conflict in the early years of party democracy in Venezuela, the Communist Party decided to create several guerrilla cells throughout the northwest and northeast of the country. These groups, as we mentioned, became the Armed Forces of National Liberation, which openly declared war on the new regime led by Rómulo Betancourt on May 9, 1961, when Betancourt decided to completely outlaw the Communist Party. But after more than 3 attempted coups and numerous violent actions by these guerrilla groups as part of their armed struggle, by 1963, the left had not achieved any significant victories. The leaders of the armed movement needed and sought more international notoriety, and for that, they came up with a plan that more than one person would consider completely crazy. However, against all common sense, these guerrillas from Caracas are going to carry out this plan successfully. At the end of August 1963, news broke that the Real Madrid FC team would be visiting Caracas for a friendly match as part of the Club World Cup, where other teams like Porto from Portugal or São Paulo from Brazil were also going.
Disputarse el lugar ganador, y las Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional deciden que
the first of the Football League,
sentido, las FAL fijan su
about how his fame kept growing. Having hundreds of admirers worldwide, we're talking about the Spanish-Argentine footballer Alfredo Di Stéfano, who, during his visit to Caracas, the Football League, football all his life. Di Stéfano and the rest of the Real Madrid squad arrive in Caracas in August 1963 at the Potomac Hotel, located on Vollmer Avenue in the San Bernardino parish. A first rather remarkable event takes place on Friday, August 23, while one of the scheduled matches between Real Madrid and São Paulo was being played. After the end of the first half, around 9:30 at night, several snipers stationed in buildings near the Olympic Stadium in the University City begin to shoot at the stands and at the police squads guarding the match. The police respond to these shots by deploying nearly 450 officers to control the situation, which returns to normal 28 minutes after the police intervention. And the game continues without major incident until the end, with the score 2-1 in favor of Sao Paulo defeating Real Madrid. Although it was not clear that night what or who caused the attack, some speculated that it could have been armed groups from the Venezuelan left who were active at the Central University of Venezuela. In any case, after the match, Di Stéfano and the rest of Real Madrid went back to the hotel where they were staying to rest. However, without anyone expecting it, at 6 in the morning the next day, August 24, 1963, while he was sleeping in room 219 on the second floor of the Potomac Hotel, Di Stéfano received 2 calls from the hotel reception from supposed police officers who, according to the receptionist, needed the football star to come down to the hotel lobby. He hung up after the last call, thinking it was a prank from his teammates, and went back to sleep. Immediately after, the 2 supposed police officers went up to his room and knocked on his door. Di Stéfano, still sleepy, opens the door, and the supposed officers explain that they have to take him with them because of the events that happened the previous day at the Olympic Stadium, to take his statement about what happened. Other versions claim that the supposed officers told the footballer that they were looking for him because of a drug trafficking complaint. The truth is that Di Stéfano, seeing that the officers had handcuffs and revolvers, was convinced that they were police officers and let them in. Di Stéfano, after finishing his personal grooming and getting ready, left the room with the 2 supposed officers and decided to go with them. He goes down with them and gets into a car with 2 more men. In the car, as they headed east of the capital, they told him the truth. He was being kidnapped by an armed group from the Venezuelan left. They also told him to excuse the use of force in the kidnapping, but that they wouldn't harm him because the whole purpose was fundamentally political. So by 6:10 in the morning, Alfredo Di Stéfano had been taken from the hotel and brought to an unknown location. Half an hour later, at 6:40 in the morning, the hotel receptionist informed the team's delegate, Mr. Francisco Moraleja, about what had happened. He contacted the police and confirmed that there was no such procedure against Di Stéfano, so he realized it was a kidnapping. The news spread quickly and caused a stir, not only among Di Stéfano's teammates, but also in the national and international press, as well as in circles related to soccer. The fact that one of the most important players in the world had been kidnapped on Venezuelan soil came as a terrible shock not only to the Venezuelan government, but also to the Spanish government. By mid-morning, after having been notified of the events by Mr. Francisco Moraleja, the Spanish ambassador to Venezuela, Matias Vegas Guerra, entered into talks with the Venezuelan authorities to coordinate the rescue of Di Stéfano. For this, the Judicial Technical Police, better known as the PTJ, ordered a little more than 100 officers to carry out raids and investigations to find the whereabouts of Di Stéfano. But for the moment, these actions by the PTJ do not lead to anything concrete. At 12 noon on the day of the kidnapping, national and international news agencies received an anonymous call informing them that the Real Madrid star was unharmed, and that his kidnapping was done to draw attention to the political and social situation in Venezuela. And in the call, they said that once their objectives were achieved, they would release the Argentine soccer player. Shortly after this, they received another anonymous call in which the man assured them that the kidnapping of Di Stéfano. It was given the code name Operation Julian Grimaud, named after a Spanish communist who had been executed in April of that year, 1963. In addition, the call claimed that the leader of the kidnapping operation was a man named Maximo Canales, who, in February 1963, just 6 months earlier, had led the hijacking of a canguro vessel in Anzoátegui, belonging to the Venezuelan Navigation Company. But they don't say anything else relevant about the situation. So with no further information, in the midst of great anxiety for Spain, Venezuela, and Argentina, the operation to get Alfredo Di Stéfano back alive continued. After these calls, things moved quickly. The Minister of the Interior, Manuel Mantilla, assured the press that the kidnapping of Di Stéfano would be resolved very soon and that the footballer would come out unharmed. This information was relayed by Francisco Moraleja to the footballer's parents and wife. Meanwhile, in Spain, the news caused hysteria and concern among Real Madrid fans and the general public. But team president Don Santiago handled it himself, as he was the only company member managing the operation. Company president Alfredo realized the operation had been carried out, and the kidnappers only wanted to draw global attention to the company's actions. Stéfano was the company's only representative.
Plan, cierro comillas.
The gentleman from the company had been executed by the company that had carried out the execution. Alfredo Único from the company Anónima Venezuela was the one who realized about the company. 1958, when he was still carrying out guerrilla activities in Cuba with the purpose of attracting worldwide attention to the Cuban revolutionary movement. But amid all this turmoil, where was Alfredo Di Stéfano? Once they took him from the hotel to a new location, and during this process, the soccer player has no idea where he is being held, since the kidnappers blindfolded him as soon as they took him from the hotel. And as Di Stéfano would later recount, they drove around the city several times and changed locations repeatedly to confuse Di Stéfano. The commander of the operation, who called himself Máximo Canales, was actually a man named Paul del Rio Canales, a man with Spanish Republican parents, born in Cuba but moved to Venezuela at the age of 2. Paul del Rio was not a nobody in that movement, as he was a prominent figure at that time within the FAL and the Venezuelan left. It was del Rio who led the team that went to the hotel to find Di Stéfano and who kept him in captivity. Once he was kidnapped, Paul del Rio reassured Di Stéfano that he would not harm him and that he had nothing personal against him. In fact, Paul del Rio tried to hide the admiration he felt for the Real Madrid footballer. During that first day of the kidnapping, the kidnappers offered Di Stéfano different foods, from Spanish paella, sandwiches, pizzas, to hot dogs, accompanied by soft drinks and beers. But Di Stéfano was reluctant to eat all this food because he was so nervous. Trying to calm Di Stéfano down, the kidnappers take off their masks, chat with him, and invite him to play several board games. As the minutes and hours passed, Di Stéfano ended up playing dominoes, poker, chess, Chinese checkers with his kidnappers. And it's even known that they bet on horse races during his stay. And even more curious, during the kidnapping, the kidnappers provided Di Stéfano with a masseur to prevent muscle injuries. On the night of the first day, Di Stéfano, who felt as though the hours were centuries long, they allowed him to send a message to his family, where he said the following, I quote, "Calm down. Dear parents and dear Sarah, I am fine. Nothing has happened to me. They are treating me very well. I hope to see you soon. A big hug." End quote. The next day, Sunday, August 25th, the police, despite the thorough inspection, had checked vehicles throughout the city and detained suspects all over the capital. In the end, there is still no trace of Alfredo Di Stéfano. This delay worries his wife in Spain, who suffers from continuous panic attacks. That day, Di Stéfano is a bit sad because it was his son Alfredito's birthday, and he can't even wish him a happy birthday over the phone. That same night, a match between Real Madrid and Porto was scheduled, but there were doubts about whether it would take place given Di Stéfano's situation. Even so, by order of Don Santiago Bernabeu himself, the match goes ahead. The police are deployed in large numbers at the Olympic Stadium, because according to several calls, the captors were going to release Di Stéfano during the match. However, this does not happen. The final score is 2-1 in favor of Madrid, the team that wins despite the absence of their star Di Stéfano, who listens to the match on the radio while being held captive. The next day, Monday, August 26, Di Stéfano has already been kidnapped for 48 hours, and the regular calls from his captors to the newspapers had stopped. In 2 days, the number of police officers working on the Di Stéfano case increases from 100 to 3,000, and still there are no clues about the whereabouts of the Argentine star. However, suddenly, around 2:45 in the afternoon, he appears at one of the doors of the Spanish embassy in Venezuela. None other than Alfredo Di Stéfano, who at 2:30 in the afternoon had been released by his captors on Libertador Avenue in Caracas. They told the world-famous star that he was now free and gave him 3 bolivars so he could get to the embassy. According to them, the objective of the operation was to make the guerrilla movement in Venezuela known worldwide, and that objective had already been achieved. Just like that, out of nowhere. The soccer player, whose whereabouts had been unknown for 56 hours and 45 minutes, shocking world public opinion, appeared in broad daylight in one of the busiest places in the Venezuelan capital. Once Alfredo Di Stéfano arrives at the Spanish embassy, the place fills up with reporters and journalists who rush in to interview the recently kidnapped athlete. He answers some questions, but soon he is taken to the residence of the Spanish ambassador, Vega Guerra, so that he could stay there for the remainder of his time in Venezuela, and he is also granted diplomatic protection. The news of the release quickly spreads around the world and brings a lot of relief, especially to Di Stéfano's family, but of course also to the directors of Real Madrid, to his fans in Spain and around the world, and of course to the Venezuelan government, which could have ended up in an even worse position than it already was for not having guaranteed the soccer star's safety if the worst had happened. In his statements to the General Directorate of Police, I told her, Paul Di Stéfano comments that he never knew that while being held in
Que tiempo después se va a saber que habría estado recluido precisamente
the house of the kidnapper Paul Del Rio. Everything returned to relative normality. Di Stéfano plays in the last match of the Cup, scheduled against Sao Paulo on Wednesday night, August 28th. Despite the efforts, the result is a scoreless draw, since Sao Paulo already had enough points to win. It is the team that finished the 1963 club championship held in Venezuela, without a doubt one of the most controversial tournaments of this championship. After the awards and ceremonies, all the teams returned to their respective countries, thus bringing to a close what would be, in their own words, one of the ones of the season, of the season, of the season, of the season, season of the season, of the world season. Did he find out that in oil-rich Venezuela, a newly established party democracy was taking shape? There was, in fact, a revolutionary guerrilla movement and strong political opposition to the regime of Romulo Betancourt, a president who never publicly says anything about what happened. As for the revolutionary Paul Del Rio, who practically outsmarted the Venezuelan police in those days, he was arrested in 1971 but released in 1974 as part of the pacification program promoted by President Rafael Caldera, after which he decided to dedicate himself to the visual arts and sculpture. And as for the National Liberation Armed Forces, they will continue carrying out all kinds of actions, both violent and nonviolent. Until the 1970s, however, they did not manage to seize power. And after the pacification process of Caldera and other events, the group gradually diminished until its complete disappearance in the 1980s. As a rather curious anecdote, Alfredo Di Stéfano and Paul Del Rio met again in 2005 when both were invited to the premiere of the feature film Real la Película, although Di Stéfano avoided greeting him in front of the cameras. Years later, he stated that he had a painting by Paul Del Rio in his house, given to him as a gesture of reparation for the kidnapping. This is how one of the most extraordinary events in the life of the Real Madrid star, Alfredo Di Stéfano, happened. He was with the woman of the woman of the woman, the 60s. As well as the reality of the political war that this nation would continue to experience for the following years. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd like to remind you that you give us a huge boost and help us a lot by interacting with the channel, leaving your comments, liking the videos, sharing the content on social media, on WhatsApp, and anywhere else, and by turning on the bell so you get notifications every time we publish new content. So thank you all again, and may God bless you.